Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Mailer. I'm the director of the Sorenson Center for the Arts. I'm also the artistic director of Commonwealth Shakespeare Company, which is the theater in residence here at Babson. And tonight we have a special guest. My friend and colleague Anthony Rapp is here with us tonight. This is part of the programming here at the Sorenson Center for the Arts that's sort of new and exciting, and I encourage you to keep checking back about what's going on. We have this really beautiful flyer that's out in the lobby. If you didn't pick it up, please do. That talks about all the amazing things that are happening here at Babson, many of which have happened here for many, many years, and they've been quietly kept secrets here at Babson. And our goal is to sort of make these wonderful programs that have been existing and these new programs that we're developing available and open to everybody. So I'm really thankful that you're all here tonight to sort of share in this with us. This particular evening is sponsored, as everything is, by the Sorenson Center for the Arts, and we're really grateful to Rick and Sandy for their incredible generosity to the college. But this particular evening is sponsored by the Malcolm K. Stearns Memorial Film Fund, which is a beautiful fund set up to show films on the campus for students here to sort of make their lives fun and exciting and pleasurable, and that's what we're here today to do. What we decided to do in this new iteration is to try to bring guests that are associated with the films that we're screening, so we can get a sort of particular insight into that film that might be something you wouldn't get access to if you just went to see the movie at the movie theater. So what we're going to do is just have a conversation, Anthony and I, over the next 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to invite you also as well to kind of join in the conversation. There are microphones at either end. We'll have a specific moment when we go to that, so don't line up yet. But hopefully this will be a fun and exciting evening for you all, and we sort of learn a little bit more about Anthony, about Rent, about his career, and sort of where we are today. So thank you.
Thank you.
So,
hello. Hello.
Hello. How are you? Anthony and I have spent a lot of time together over the years all over the world, so this is kind of fun to sit down, and but it's also kind of a where do I start kind of moment for me. But why don't we start at the beginning, where you grew up as a child actor, and so you started very early in this career, didn't you?
Which is weird. I mean, I think it's weird that there are a lot of young actors who continue on to really keep wanting to work and then wind up working. A lot of young actors wind up, dying or or like having, shoplifting incidents. Because it's a strange business to grow up in. But no, I was fortunate that I was the youngest of three kids. My mom and dad divorced when I was very young, like 2. So my mom was a single mother nurse, which is unusual. And this is the 70s where I was growing up, so nurses didn't make a lot of money. So somehow she scraped by and made it possible for me to then also, while she was doing all that work to try to support the family, give me opportunities, because it's something that I was eager to do. Mm-hmm. I performed at a camp where she was a nurse. I loved it, and then I went home, and apparently when I was like 8, I called and scheduled myself an audition from a local paper advertisement for auditions. So I mean, I was like, that was something that was my idea. And then she was like, yes, please, and helping me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of luck, the luck of having my particular mother, you know. I think there's a lot of parents, sadly, whose kids want to be artistically involved, and they're like naysaying the whole time, or it was the opposite for me. Mm-hmm. So. And talk about some of your early. What did you film, television, theater as a young artist, or all the above? It was all theater until I did a play in New York called Precious Sons, which was it was on Broadway, but it was short-lived. We only ran for like 4 months or something, or a couple, 3 months maybe. Mm-hmm. It was a short but very incredible time. Mm-hmm. And from that, I got bigger agents who took me on, and from that, I had more film auditions, and then from that, the next year, I got cast in, my first film was Adventures in Babysitting when I was 15. Which, that was a film that was so much fun. It was such a great experience, and it did okay when it came out, but it wasn't like a big hit, but it's had this life. It's 27 years later, and it still is, that.
Right.
And at the time it was like fine, but it wasn't like a big celebrated thing, so it's cool.
And were you splitting time at that point between Illinois and New York, or had you moved to?
We sort of went where the work was. That time I did that play in New York, and we were there for that time, and then when it was over, I came home and basically living in Illinois. And then when I graduated high school, I spent a little time in LA looking for work. I got a little TV gig that wasn't very long, but that helped give me some money to move to New York finally, officially after that. So.
So you've been a New York actor. You haven't really done LA.
Just for that chunk, and then going out there for periodic time moments of auditions or meetings or whatever. But
and that's obviously a choice you made. What is why?
I like living in a city where you can walk around.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I mean, there are now neighborhoods in LA where there's enough transplants that they're trying to transform those neighborhoods into a little more pedestrian-friendly areas. So at least there's that. If I ever have to live there for any period of time for work, I would want to live in one of those places. That's part of it. But there's just generally, my experience is there's more diversity of experience and life and people in New York that you can encounter. In LA, it's so showbiz-centric and so car-centric that I think people can very easily become isolated. And it's just, the business is so mega money-making that so much of the measure of success is often those things instead of the artistic life of it. And I feel like in New York, yes, there's money to be made in New York, of course, but it's not on the same scale, and therefore I think that people are a little more committed to artistic excellence overall in New York than in LA. At least, not to say it's all people in either city, but that the air that I'm breathing in New York just feels more like the air that I want to breathe. Plus LA is more smog, but.
You just mentioned the notion of success. How do you define success for you as an artist? Because I know that's a very big question, but success on a particular project, success on a year of work, success on a phase of your career?
Probably all the above. Ultimately success, part of being a successful actor to me is being able to earn your living as an actor, which is, if you look at statistics, there's a lot of actors, there's so many actors and so many don't earn their living as an actor, but that's not the only measure by any means. Like you could earn your living doing, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and I'm not sure that would be that fulfilling. But I think there's, just like with anything else, there's the good and the bad associated with different kinds of success. But yeah, the true bonus is when it's all of the things line up, and that certainly happened with Rent, for instance.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
But in terms of all the things lining up, the artistic success met with the critical success and the employment success and the public success.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about sort of your early career and when you were just kind of struggling, and what was that like? What was your? I think we all think of artists after they've arrived at this place that they've arrived at, but don't realize that there's a journey to getting there. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what that was like for you, and sort of what it was like living in New York with no money? What was it like, wondering if your agent was going to drop you? What was it like, going after auditions and not getting them?
I was fortunate when I first got to New York. I got cast in 6 Degrees of Separation pretty quickly. When I first moved back to New York as an adult, or as a young adult. And then I worked very steadily for 3 or 4 years with very little downtime, like going from project to project. Nothing was huge, but they were all like steady, good, nice, good. And then I hit a wall. And it was like the phone stopped ringing. My agent left the agency, and I inherited a different agent, and he sort of had no interest. And so I was like I felt like I was in real limbo, and it was scary.
How old were you at that point?
21.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you were a kid.
22.
Yeah. Okay.
Something like that. Yeah, 22.
You couldn't sort of pinpoint anything that happened. You didn't have a temper tantrum and hit a director or something like that.
No. I think in that case it was when my agent, looking back in retrospect, my agent left, and I was at a big agency which had a lot of power, but that only means so much if you have an agent who's really your advocate there to keep you above the mix of all the people that they're representing, and So this new guy just wasn't. Part of the thing that can happen at big agencies, they have all these huge names at the agency, and so they don't need to really hustle for them. They're just essentially fielding offers and working out schedules and negotiating things, as opposed to like hustling and picking up the phone and trying to make shit happen. They're just yes, no. So so he wasn't very good at the helping develop a new young artist kind of situation. So I got lost in the shuffle in that sense. I got a job at Starbucks which at the time, believe it or not, this is 1994. There were like 3 in the whole city. They were just brand new to New York. I know you can't imagine this. I mean, it's crazy. So I couldn't even get very many hours to. So I was like, things were really tight, and I had enough of savings to kind of scrape. But the other bonus thing that happened is that my brother and I were living together in this walk-up apartment in the East Village, and our landlord skipped town, and the bank foreclosed on the building, and then there was no one to pay rent to for like a year or 2. So we were like really lucky. That's just it's crazy. So, I mean, if that hadn't happened, I don't know what I would have done either, because that saved a lot of money. So I mean, these weird like fate. Luck things have happened for sure, but it was when I was working at Starbucks, and a new agent, like literally, I walked, the very first meeting I had with him, he got promoted from being an assistant, and I walk in his office, meet him, he's a really nice guy, and on his desk was the audition for Rent, which was at the time just a workshop, a 10-performance thing. It's nothing huge, a small little thing, but that was the very first thing, and then I got that, and then literally with him, I didn't stop. I was back to the old way of like project or project. Again, nothing huge, but nice.
Great.
And then he got fired, and then I finally was like, I'm out of here. I left the agency because
And did you go to Paradigm then?
Well, I went with Sarah Fargo, who wound up at Paradigm.
Got it. Okay. So let's go back to the sort of that audition notice on the desk of your agent. So let's sort of slow that period down and sort of telescope that period out a little bit, because this is, in many ways, this is this piece that we're going to see tonight, and that many of us have seen on stage, is changed the course of musical theater. It really reinvented the form, and you were right at the center of that. And I think we'd all really love to hear more about what that experience was like. But and of course, if you want to know more, you can buy the book, because Anthony and I worked together for many years on developing the book that he wrote called Without You into a play, a stage version, which we've actually done in Tokyo, not Tokyo yet.
Hopefully
soon.
Seoul,
we've been
in New York, and
London,
Pittsburgh, and London, and Edinburgh, and Toronto.
So
and
Boston.
All over the world. And
Coming
Boston.
soon again, we hope, to Boston.
Yeah, Boston. So.
But this really tells in detail the story about what happened. But let's just talk a little bit more about that. So let's just talk about the first audition that you had for Rent. So you were called in, and
but even to go back to that sheet,
yeah,
because I think it's kind of interesting. The sheet just said, a new rock opera based on La Boheme about a group of friends in the East Village, and then it had a little description of some of the characters. So Mark was a documentary filmmaker, and Roger a rock musician. Then there was a transvestite and a HIV positive S&M dancer. So you have to. So you guys, this is 2014 now. This is almost 20 years ago that I'm looking at this. The world has changed a lot since then. Now we kind of take it for granted that on TV there's RuPaul's Drag Race, and up until that point there had been Tootsie. I mean, in terms of there was Victor Victoria. The idea of a musical that dealt with these things was really kind of outlandish. It was. So I know it's kind of hard to, it's like the old man going, you won't believe the shit I've seen. But it's like, it's just the truth. Just take my word for it. And the phrase rock opera wasn't exactly one that, set my heart stirring with confidence. Because if you look through the history of that form, there's not a lot of really good stuff. But I knew who the director, Michael Greif, was, because I'd seen something he directed that was really, really spectacular. But he wasn't famous then, by any means, except to people who were paying attention, downtown theater stuff. And it was the New York Theater Workshop, which was a theater that had a really good reputation. But it was, believe me, and again, it might be weird to think this, because now Rent is this really super famous thing that's been around for, all this time. But it was this, no one knew what it was. It was nothing, as far as anyone knew. But it was intriguing enough, and it was a musical, and I hadn't done a musical in a long time, and then I got to audition for it. And the audition, we had to sing a rock or pop song instead of a musical theater song. I mean, can you imagine people singing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" at a Rent audition? So I sang "Losing My Religion" by REM, which I thought was a really good song. But and are there any actors in the audience? I'm just curious. Yeah. So when you audition for things and they give you a choice to pick your own song, I just recommend it be a song you love, at the very minimum. Should be a song it should be a song you can sing. But it should be a song that you can sing that you love, because I think that helps. So that was a case of that. And then I got called back on the spot, which doesn't usually happen.
But didn't you say earlier in the workshop that we did earlier today with the students that you messed up?
I messed up, yeah.
Yeah, both of those auditions, both the first call and the open call and the callback.
Yeah, I did. I messed up both times. I jumped a verse in Losing My Religion, kept going. And then the second one they gave me the song Rent to learn, and Mark starts on one note and Roger starts on a different note, but the music underneath is basically the same. But I started singing on Roger's note instead of Mark's note, so they stopped me and I started again. I got the part. So, this is true. I think not just for actors, but for anybody in any kind of interview situation. If you screw up, if they're not going to hire you because you made a little mistake, you probably don't want to work with them anyway. But a mistake is not the end of the world. Believe me, they're not looking for perfection. I think most people, and if they are, do you really want to work for somebody who's looking for perfection? No. So, anyway.
So the first audition, you get called back right away. You met Jonathan at
Yes.
that audition, right?
Yes, Jonathan Larson was there.
Jonathan Larson was the composer who had written both the book and the music for this piece.
And I didn't know anything about him.
Nobody did, really,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he had done Tick, Tick, Boom was before this?
Yeah, but that was on such a small little scale. I wasn't even aware of it.
You weren't even aware of it? Okay.
And and he was like this really kind of like nice, friendly guy, kind of schlumpy, but had a good-natured vibe about him. And he was sort of sitting in the audience, kind of hunched up in his chair and chewing on a pencil. And
did he say anything to you?
He was a fan of Dazed and Confused, I learned, which was nice. At the time I wouldn't have thought many musical theater composers would know very well, because it's not from that world. So that was cool.
So that was the very first workshop. That was meant to be how many weeks of work?
It was 10 performances, and I think our rehearsal, if I remember correctly, was like 2.5, 3 weeks at the most. It was pretty tight.
Okay.
There was really very little budget to speak of. The costume designer literally came to our houses and apartments and looked in our closets and pulled stuff. And the set was, part of the reason the set became the set it was for Rent was that just for the workshop, we had tables and chairs and a little bit of scaffolding. But then there was and microphones that were visible. And there was something about that aesthetic that actually really worked. The sort of in the original stage directions, Jonathan had written something like, the stage should resemble a pile of junk more than a set, or, that it should be kind of like this. He was inspired by, there's these junk sculptures in the East Village. I think that made him think of that, But the idea that it's very kind of makeshift and, a bunch of people coming together, and that, this kind of presentational / organic, interesting mixture somewhere in there was something of real, that had effect. And then, of course, it became more designed as we did it later, but it still had that basic aesthetic was established because of, literally because we had no money to do it. And from those 10 performances, there were producers who came to see it. I mean, it had people were very excited by it, as you can see. It was a special piece, but it was very different in that form than it wound up being. I mean, a lot got changed, but there were 3 producers in particular who saw it and were excited enough by it that they optioned it. They gave New York Theater Workshop a bunch of money to then produce it for real, with the option to then take it to commercial ventures after that. But even then, no one was thinking Broadway. As far as I know. I mean, Jonathan and I became friends, and then he would keep me posted on what was happening, and it took about a year from when we did it in those 10 performances to when it came back around for the off-Broadway. And he said that the conversations I remember having were that they were looking at maybe these venues, like maybe an old converted club or something, and doing it kind of like a site-specific environmental or downtown. So Broadway was not even a pipe dream, as far as I knew. I mean, I think that he had dreams of being on Broadway as a composer, but at the time too, again, this is still the biggest shows that were still running or that were around were Phantom of the Opera and Les Mis and Cats had, I think, maybe just closed or whatever, or, you know.
It's a very different aesthetic.
Yeah.
Very different world view. Very different.
Of what could work commercially on Broadway. It had been a long time since there was like a homegrown New York, you know, contemporary show that was a hit. You know, Company was in the 70s. Hair was in the 60s.
Right, right.
You know.
And talk to us, so then you go into this next workshop, which was again, this was the Off-Broadway. This was still New York Theater Workshop, which is a very highly regarded New York off-Broadway, but not-for-profit theater company.
Yeah.
And
it's like 150 seats or like less than 200 seats. It's a fantastic space though. It's like really big stage, wide. There's not a bad seat in the house. It's like there's a lot of room between the rows. It's like an ideal place for theater. It's like the perfect theater. And perfect for us because it's in the East Village and our show's about the East Village.
And so you start rehearsals. And I guess I'm curious too, so what some of your first encounters of this music that's become so, this music is iconic. It's sort of, you know, we hear those opening chords of Seasons of Love and we all kind of go back to that place. But what was it like to hear that for the first time? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Well, that was beautiful. The first time I heard any of the music was for the audition. Jonathan had recorded little demos at his house of the songs, and it was the song "Rent," which is, you know, in the show it's ultimately played on a, you know, really good electric guitar with real drums, but he had done it on his little. This is in the days before GarageBand, so it was like MIDI, crappy, you know, and it was like, so I was like, what's that? You know. Because I like rock and roll, and it didn't sound like it. So that was my first encounter with the music, and I wasn't so sure. I mean, it was interesting for musical theater music,
right?
But it wasn't like entirely convincing as rock and roll. It wasn't until I heard the band play that song for real that I was like, okay, yeah, that's rock and roll. But the first day of rehearsal, what we did, which in an unusual move, we started by learning Seasons of Love. And that has since become a tradition of the show. Like that's the way that all first rehearsals of that show should begin, because that is the centerpiece of the show. And it's not just because it's a famous song, because obviously it wasn't famous then, but that's what it totally encapsulates everything that the show is about. And that was what Michael Greif, our director, talked about, is like just starting us out on that foot, and also starting us out to sing together in that way, to create this ensemble, because the show is also so much about community. So yeah, to hear that song was like it was the first time I was like, oh, I'm part of something spectacular, or potentially spectacular.
You could sense it, right?
Yes.
At that moment.
Yes, and then it only developed from there. The more I encountered the material, and then it kept getting better anyway, because it kept, you know, rewriting it, making it better, and then he made it even better and better and better, and then we did the Off-Broadway.
So let's talk about the Off-Broadway. So that you started rehearsal. That was a longer rehearsal process? Three weeks, 4 weeks?
I think it was 4 or 5 plus tech or with tech. I don't, you know, something like that. And then, you know, the idea was we would have previews, and during previews you rehearse during the day, make changes, do the show at night, learn from the changes, make changes during the next day, do the show at night. So that's a process of developing a new show. Like, that's what you do. Of course, the big wrench in our plan was that Jonathan very suddenly and out of nowhere died after the dress rehearsal. And then, you know, for those of you who aren't theater artists, you've probably heard the phrase dress rehearsal, but you don't necessarily know what it means exactly. But it's in New York, if you have a dress rehearsal, you have an invited audience. So it's the first time you're getting to do it for anyone outside of the little circle of creative team and theater people, the people who work at the theater. So we had a full house of invited friends and colleagues, and, you know, and so that was the one and only time that Jonathan got to experience this version of the show with an audience. And the response was amazing. I mean, it was like a standing ovation. And after the show, I came out, and people were like totally surrounding him, which, you know, if you go to see a show, people, if they're surrounding anybody, they're maybe surrounding the actors a little bit, but they like were seeking him out. It was clear that it wasn't just his friends. It was like admirers, people who wanted to like talk to him and thank him and, you know, have that moment. And the New York Times had sent someone to see the dress rehearsal, not because it wasn't a critic, it was just somebody who was writing a piece about La Boheme, and Rent is based on La Boheme, and so they thought, oh, that's interesting. And he was so blown away that he asked Jonathan to sit for an on-the-spot interview, which, was a pretty big deal. For better or for worse, the New York Times tends to have a lot of power in the world of theater. So I think it's safe to say that Jonathan must have been very excited about that, sitting down with the New York Times. But I didn't get to talk to him about it because he was talking to the reporter behind a glass partition in the box office, is the only quiet place in the theater. So last time I saw him was him having that conversation, and I didn't even really say goodnight because I'd see him tomorrow. And then we woke up the next morning to this phone calls that he had died in the night. He had gone home and collapsed on his kitchen floor and died. He was 35 years old. In fact, it was tomorrow is the anniversary of that day. It's January 25th. So tonight was the anniversary of the last time that he saw the show.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
Which was now, so that's 96, so it's 18 years ago. Crazy.
So, catastrophic. I mean, it just both catastrophic in so many different ways. Catastrophic personally, first and foremost. He had become a very close friend of yours. He was sort of the voice of this piece. But catastrophic from just a practical point of view. These are dress rehearsals or previews. That's when everything's being altered and fixed and nuanced, and sometimes songs are cut, sometimes songs are added in this process.
And we knew that he knew it wasn't finished because it's not finished until you're done, until you've really been with an audience and lived with the piece, living and breathing every night in front of an audience. It's not simply when they're laughing or clapping or not. It's just you can feel it. You start to feel the rhythms, and together you learn, and then you make changes. And we knew that he was eager to do that. So he was under no illusion that it was finished. But at the same time, then we were left with the question, well, how do we finish the work that's unfinished when he's not here to finish it? So, with a tremendous amount of care and respect, Michael and the artistic director, Jim Nicola, and Tim Wilde, the musical director, and we, the actors, and Lynn, the dramaturg, all put our heads and hearts together to try to figure out where, we could make the cuts and trims necessary. But we didn't really write any new material. That would seem strange to bring someone new in to write in a different voice. That seemed weird because it was so him, So we did our best to honor his and what we knew his intentions to be, but also to keep trying to make it clearer and better where we could,
And just take us for a moment into that day, that morning, and that night, because presumably you had a performance scheduled that night, right? The night you wake up in the morning, there's a voicemail from Jim on your voicemail to say, "Call me right away."
Just call.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't leave the message. Jonathan died as a message. I found that out from a phone call.
Sure.
Directly talking, but.
You all go down.
We had the first preview scheduled for that night, and pretty quickly it became clear that wasn't going to happen. Like we canceled the preview, but we literally all just gathered at the theater and kind of like for a lot of the first part of the day just sort of sat around and didn't talk much. I mean, it was just sort of like being with this shock, and the silence of it was so enormous. But it's at a certain point in the day, Michael Greif, I guess, had talked, I don't know exactly, he talked to Jim or whoever, they had conferred, and they started coming up with the notion of, instead of doing the normal performance at night, doing something. Having the theater be silent didn't seem right either, but it didn't seem right to have just a normal paying audience. So his parents were flying in from Albuquerque where they lived, and to try to get the word out and invite as many people as we could reach who were in his circle to come to the theater and sing through the show for them, and just as a kind of memorial, and do something to mark the occasion, which, there's no right thing to do, but that seemed like the most right. And part of the reason for the sing through as opposed to a staging is just that we were still working on a lot of technical things. There were costume changes and stuff. We didn't want to worry about any of that. We just wanted it to be about the words and music. And in the show, it certainly has a tragic element, but it has a lot of joy and a lot of energy and a lot of comedy in it too in moments. And we weren't sure what that was going to be like on this night because of everything. It was such an intense experience. But part of what was, looking back, we started the sing through, and we just sort of went for it and went full out. And after Rent, the opening number, which is a big rock and roll finish, the audience went crazy, like at a rock concert, the way they would every night. And looking back, I feel like it's, even when you're going through shock and grief, if something is truthful, it will still connect to you and communicate. And the life force, the show itself is about people facing their own mortality and living anyway. And so we were demonstrating right then and there the living proof that the show told the truth about what all that meant. And then at the end of Act 1 in La Vie Blonde, which is exactly about that, to living with not dying from disease, to, the celebration of that, the energy was so strong that we couldn't stay seated. We started just, got up on the tables and danced. And that joy was just as present even in the face of all this sadness. And both things can coexist. And again, his parents were sitting in the audience, watching this creation of their son who just died, and completely present to it with everyone else. I mean, it was, there's so many things, echoes in the show, the whole, every time we were talking about Angel dying, it was like we were saying Jonathan, and there's a funeral in Act 2, and it was like we were having the funeral for Jonathan. And his friends said afterwards, it was like he's written his own funeral, But there was such a catharsis that happened for everybody in the room that night, and it was very, very, selfishly, it was very healing for us to be able to channel his material in that way. It helped us for sure, and I think it helped the people who were there in the audience. Early in the show, one song, Glory, one song, Before I Go, one song, To Leave Behind. It's like there was this reality and fiction thing happening that was so paper thin, the difference between the two. And then, we somehow, there were moments where it was almost hard to sing, just because it was so emotional.
Technically,
physically.
Producing sound.
But we just somehow made it through,
and
because you can't control that stuff. It's just coming. It just pours out of you sometimes. If you ever, experienced that kind of shock or grief, it just sometimes there's just this engulfs you. And then at the end of the show, there was this enormous ovation that just went on and on and on and on. And then we all went backstage. We were completely wiped out, but very, again, this kind of catharsis, and exhausted but fulfilled, and sad and grateful, and all those things. But as we were gathering our things, we realized that the audience was entirely silent. And I came out from backstage, and no one had moved in the whole audience. And I found a friend of mine sitting, she was a mutual friend of Jonathan's and mine, and I sat with her it was a very long time. And when you have a room full of people who are not talking, that is particularly kind of, intense silence. And then finally someone at the back of the theater just said, "Thank you, Jonathan Larson." And then that kind of broke the spell. And Jonathan's father came up to me, and I'd met him before the show, and he was just like, "We got to make the show a hit." And then we were just crossing our fingers, and we were just really lucky. Because, critics can be super fickle. We got mostly rave reviews, but there were a couple critics who didn't like it, and if those critics had been the ones who'd written for the certain papers and not others, I might not be here right now. I don't know. Because you needed the word at the time. Now with the internet, it's democratized a little bit in some cases. There are things that can defy critical consensus if they connect with an audience. And we were connected with an audience anyway, but it just helped, launch us. The fact that the critics responded in the way they did, because the audiences already were. And then we became this smash hit sellout, and then we moved to Broadway, which was again, not even a pipe dream. So. But it all came from a very committed place that everyone involved wanted to tell the story that mattered to us, that started from Jonathan. And Jonathan even he made a point to share with us his reasons for writing it, which doesn't always happen when you meet, writers. They just a lot of times they just sit in the corner quietly, let the work speak for itself, which is fine too. But it was so important for Jonathan to include us in his life and to make us aware of the context that he was creating, so that we were a part of a movement towards something collectively, instead of just a bunch of individual artists doing this nice show we're doing. And then so I feel like any of the success that we gained was earned from that kind of dedication that we all shared with each other.
And you've stayed quite close with all of those people, really, most of those people, haven't you? Because it was the same core team, really, from project from version to version, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, I mean, it was Michael Greif, who was the same director, but in terms of the actors, no, it was just Daphne Rubin-Vega, myself, and Gilles Chiasson, who was the original Will I soloist.
Okay.
We were the only three who were in both versions.
Oh, okay.
But certainly stayed close with the original Broadway cast. And Adina Menzel and I are working together again on a new show, and Michael's directing it. And, Tom Kitt is composing it, and Brian Yorkie, who they wrote Next to Normal. They were profoundly inspired by Rent and the work that Jonathan did. And so, like, the legacy, and Michael directed their show Next to Normal.
Yes.
The last two musicals to win the Pulitzer. So there's this thread connecting all of it that's really, really, really powerful very meaningful.
Yeah. Let's talk for just a few minutes about the film itself and what that process like was. Because that was some years later, really, wasn't it? And what was that like for you to revisit this story? Because it was 10 years later, wasn't it, from the original?
It was 10 years from when we first did the workshop, that we started rehearsal for the movie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, first of all, it was like a miracle that we got to do it in the first place.
It's very unusual. We should just note that, right? That usually one would be replaced by the it actor of the moment. Right?
I know Justin Timberlake was really trying to get to be a part of the movie. Really, seriously.
Is that right?
No, seriously, he was. And Chris had a really good meeting or two with him, and he liked him very much, and he thought that was certainly a strong possibility. Chris Columbus, I mean, the director of the film. So it might have been some whole other ball of wax. I mean, who knows? Right. But Chris, I've known Chris from 27 years ago, from when I did Adventures of Babysitting, because he directed that. And I remember when he came to see Rent, and he loved it so much. And I forget if it was his mother or father, but I think it was his mother, had just passed away before he saw it. So it like really spoke to him. And I remember talking to him that night, and he was just, so stirred up by it. So it didn't surprise me when his name came around, because before that, Spike Lee had been very close to making the film, and I forget, there were a couple other names. Joel Schumacher was really trying. There were all these people like trying to do it, but Chris was the one who made it happen. And when the word first got out that he was thinking about, like, that was maybe going to be his next project, my friend emailed me. He's like, "Oh, you're going to do it now?" And I was like, maybe. I don't know, but I don't know. I certainly knew it was a possibility, but at the same time, I thought enough time had passed that it was unlikely. So when it came around that we were going to have these meetings with him, he basically just wanted to see if we could look the appropriate age still.
Right.
And I think he was very relieved to find out that we could. Because he secretly, or not so secretly, but he wanted us to be a part of it from the beginning. So we were just really lucky that happened. And I mean, I don't think the film is perfect by any means, but I think what it does is capture the core of it very powerfully. And there's certain moments that cinematically, I feel, tell the story even more clearly than it's ever been told before in certain aspects of it. And there are, things you can do with like a montage on screen that can tell a story in new ways that really is powerful and beautiful too. So I'm very, very proud of the film, and I'm very proud that the film has introduced that many more people to the show. I mean, the conventional wisdom used to be that when a film came out, it would kill the theater version, and it's actually proven to be the opposite. Like Chicago, when the movie came out, it actually revitalized the Broadway run, and when Rent, the movie came out, it revitalized the Broadway run, and now the show is being done all over the world now in community theaters and colleges and high schools, and in a way that probably wouldn't have happened just from the history. I mean, it might have happened anyway, but the film made that even more.
And you've directed the musical at least once.
Once, yeah.
In South Africa.
I directed in South Africa, which was an incredible experience, given the history of that country and a multiracial cast. I mean, the theater community in South Africa has always been pretty integrated, as much as it could be. But it's not that long that the country was segregated completely, and a show that and certainly South Africa has been ravaged by AIDS, and in a different side of the community, like it's been much more heterosexual. The heterosexual community that's been ravaged more so than the gay community in South Africa, although that too. But so it was very powerful to be able to do the show in that environment, and the young actors there were so hungry to do it too, because their musical theater opportunities are kind of 10 years behind the time, so they were still doing all the old-fashioned stuff essentially, and then they got to do Rent, and they were so enriched by it. It was very, very special.
Interesting. So before we turn it over to the crowd for questions, a couple of things that just, we could obviously talk all night, but a couple key things I wanted to check in with you about. One, as an openly gay actor, which you've been for many, many years, how do you see that shifting now? And we see more and more actors feeling comfortable being open about their sexuality, and that's sort of a new thing. Yeah. You've lived that life for a long time.
Long time. I think it was like 92 that I came out of my, it was just like a very small scale. I was doing this off-Broadway play, and I just thanked my boyfriend in my bio, but that wasn't something that was happening very much then.
Interesting.
No, I mean, it's great. The fact that Neil Patrick Harris is a huge star is no less a huge star since he came out. Probably in some ways more of a star.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's interesting. There's always it seems like historically there's been more room for an acceptance of women who came out. Although I'm not saying it was always easy for them, but Ellen had she had like a bit of a downturn for a minute, but then she obviously came through that. But even back in the day, Martina Navratilova, I'm sure she had some hectoring or problems, but she maintained her stardom in many ways. She might have a different story than that, but. Yeah, I think for male actors, I think it's been rarer, and the fact that right now Jim Parsons and Neil and Zach Quinto and Jonathan Groff that are younger character actors who are doing all sorts of great work, getting accolades for it. They're certainly not losing any bankability. That word, bankability. They're bankable. I think that's great. And I'm all for it. Yeah, it's all good.
And then last thing I wanted to check in with you about is how do you think of yourself as, in a way, an artist is his own or her own business in some ways? Do you have any thoughts about that? About how have you kind of, yes, you have an agent, you have a manager. Many actors don't have that, but nonetheless, you generate your own work in many ways, and you're not sitting back waiting for the phone to ring. You're out there making connections. Many people probably don't know this, but you served as the assistant director to Michael Greif on Next to Normal, which is a job that people that are just coming out of colleges would do. That's a very unusual job for a seasoned Broadway veteran actor to say, I'm going to be an assistant director on a project, and that was. You weren't actually the AD on the Broadway.
No, because I was working on the Rent tour during that time. I would have, though. I would have continued with it, yeah.
But this was something, this was an off-Broadway production at that point.
No, I don't know.
That has turned into a relationship between you and Tom, which you probably had that relationship, but that's now also, in some way, led to If Then, and you work on that. So not that you were strategically thinking, but do you know what I mean? It's just interesting, how...
I don't know. I remember when I was younger, I resisted the word career. I remember so well, during the Adventures in Babysitting press tour, it was my first time doing a movie press junket thing, and so I was and I'd just done a play in New York, this really fantastic, artistically fulfilling, but unsuccessful play in New York. And so I was feeling very serious about myself as an artist. And I remember resisting any notion of that I was in it, for a career. And it's just, a little naive. Because yes, you have to, there's nothing wrong with putting food on the table with the work you do. And I can't point to exactly when the shift happened. I think it was, really with the success of Rent, I suddenly had to confront, I actually had an income that started to become more steady. And then I could realize, okay, there's nothing wrong with it, A, and B, that can help open up all these other doors, and saying yes to opportunities, and saying yes to experiences, and saying yes to a diversity of experience. I feel, for me, it's important to be all kinds of different things. But some people might argue that you should be very focused and do the one thing, but I would argue keep yourself open for all sorts of different things. So I've written, and I've written songs, and I've directed, and I've assistant directed, and I've acted, and I've produced a little bit, so...
You invested in Broadway shows?
Yeah, I've invested into Next to Normal, and that that was a success, so that was good. I mean, I was proud to do it though, to support it. So I guess it's like the business decisions I've made have all been really driven by some sense of the artistic integrity of something. Honestly, I wouldn't invest in something that I didn't love. I just wouldn't. But that's just, so whether that's good entrepreneurship, I don't know. But I believe in that, part of if you look back through history, a lot of the things that did become successful, there was the seed of something somebody was passionate about and believed in and took a stand for, And part of what happens in Hollywood, I think a lot of times, is that they just try to repeat success rather than remember, it was the innovation that was successful. It was the thing out of left field that was successful. You can't always just repeat the thing out of left field.
Right.
Right. I mean, Gravity, there's been nothing like it ever before on screen. After 100 years of cinema, you still have never seen anything like it. And that director was very accomplished, and he had huge box office success with the Harry Potter film, and clearly knew what he was doing, and yet it still took him however many years to secure the financing for this outlandish thing that has turned into a huge hit. But it's a huge hit also because it has a certain integrity to it, I think. The two go hand in hand. So, not everything is like market research. I hate to tell you, business school. I mean, if you go back, if you market research the likelihood that Rent would become one of the longest running shows in Broadway history, you get laughed out of the room. A rock opera about artists in the East Village based on an old opera. No. Not going to be one of the biggest hits in Broadway history, no. Except it was.
Great. So why don't we see if folks have some questions. There are two microphones here. We're going to be pretty brief with this so we can actually get to the film itself. But
people are shy. You have to be willing to make a fool of yourself.
Hi, Anthony.
Hello.
First, I am not afraid to admit that Adventures in Babysitting was a fundamental part of my childhood, so thank you for that. When I think of Rent, and then certainly another one of my favorites, Dazed and Confused, I think of ensemble, and I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what it's like to work with an ensemble, maybe some secrets of success working with an ensemble, and maybe even as a director cultivating that.
Yeah, that's cool. Something I profoundly believe in. When I go to see theater, I want to see a bunch of human beings on stage collectively sharing an experience and telling a story. When I see a bunch of cookie cutter robots just dancing in dance moves, I don't care. So, whatever, the special things are when you feel that life force in it, and I do think a director sets the tone in a room for that. And there's not like one magic formula way of doing it, but I think anything that gives people context, we are human beings. We're always living in the context of something, and if you're not given context and your default as a dancer is just to sort of do dance moves, then that's what you're going to do because that's the context in which you're living. But if you're given a context in which those moves have meaning inside of the story, and this person doing these dance moves has a relationship with this person, then I think any human being will naturally want to fulfill that and gravitate toward that. So, creating context where everybody in the room knows what the show is about and what's important about it, whether that's aesthetically. It's a mixture of aesthetics, but it's also a mixture of technical things. It's a mixture of thematic ideas, and I think that's one of Michael Greif's enormous strengths is that. And it's not. He does say some things, but it's also sort of like by example and by the way in which there's a kind of the way in which he listens and the questions that he asks. You know what I mean? So, I think that's a great thing to aspire to, and then. I think it's helpful to be a director and actor in the sense that I understand from being a director that you're trying to create a holistic experience. And so each individual, yes, they have their role to play, but you're trying to create something holistic. And so as an actor, then I recognize the job I have as an actor to be a part of that, and vice versa.
Excellent. Somebody else?
You can shout.
Yeah, you can probably shout out from where you are. Yeah,
and we'll repeat it.
Thank you. So since you've had such a long-term, intimate relationship with this piece of work, what have you taken with you from Mark? Or how do you relate to Mark, or maybe conversely, how do you not relate to the character of Mark?
Well, when we were first starting the show, I mean, because my age was closer to Mark's real age, but my time of life was also closer to Mark's time of life in terms of the struggle that I was going through to make my work, feasible. But also, part of what Mark is dealing with is losing friends or the possibility of losing friends. And at the time that we were doing the show, my mom was very ill with cancer, and then she died during the run. So that, and plus, and then my friend Jonathan Larson died. So those real life things, again, were very tissue paper thin. And so all these years later, I feel like I'm much more able to deal with those things. More like if confronted with it again, I could process it a little more openly and with a little more wisdom or maturity or something than Mark could. But so I feel like I've grown up. And when I actually went back to the show in 2009 and 2010 and did a reunion tour with Adam Pascal and but it was cool. It was really wonderful in so many ways. Like good work, it stays alive, and he and I think have grown up a lot, and so I think we brought different colors came through. But it was also like revisiting a younger version of myself. It wasn't just revisiting an old role I'd played, but also a younger version of myself. So I got to see how I'd grown up a little.
Excellent. Yeah. Yes, you had a question.
Mine was actually, like, as you went back each time, because I knew that you had gone back in '09, what did you do to keep it fresh? First of all, during the first run where, it's a long time, and I know as actors, you have different ways to keep it fresh. So how did you do that? And then if maybe you can just talk a little bit about, how different it was when you went back and revisited years later.
Well, honestly, keeping something fresh has never occurred to me as being something difficult to do. When it's good material, when it's rich material, because there's so much in it, and it keeps giving back. And it's challenging enough to sing and perform that you can't just sort of like just ever coast your way through it anyway. I mean, for me, I've always loved the challenge of the 8-show-a-week grind of getting it up every time, So that I like that. I like the rhythms of that and the challenge of it. It's exhausting sometimes, and it's hard. It was only ever hard physically. It was never hard to like want to do it. Partly because it's always meant so much to me, even before Jonathan died, but certainly after he died, it meant even more in terms of my. I've always felt I have a certain responsibility to uphold the integrity of it and the spirit of it and the meaning of it, because I was witness to it and a part of it, and he's gone. So I'm part of what's keeping it alive, and so therefore I'm part of what's keeping him alive. And so all of those things, I think, plus then, with someone like Adam, whom I love and who's one of my longtime friends and colleagues, but one of the things I love about him is that every night on stage, no matter what, he was 100% there. So if you're a little tired on stage as an actor, all you have to do is look in the eyes of your fellow actor, and they'll pick you right up. So all of those things together. I think it would, I don't think I could say the same thing about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, for instance. I mean, I don't think, one of the other long runs I've done in the last decade, I did a tour of Little Shop of Horrors, and I had a great time doing that, but that is not a show that I would think I would want to do for a very long time. Because it doesn't have as much in it to keep sustaining itself, ultimately, for me. But it was really fun, and I loved it, and I loved the people, and I wouldn't trade it in for anything. But, it didn't have the greatness of Rent.
Rent, there was just something about it that just, it goes to the core of, I think, life.
I agree. And I've always said that people who don't, and there's certainly people who don't like Rent, and that's, of course, their prerogative. But I do think, and I don't say this facetiously. I honestly think for people there are certain people who have written things about Rent or whatever that I just feel like they're just allergic to it. And I feel like there's a part of them that's a little dead. I really do. That they just don't, I don't say it flippantly. I think there's a part of them that's they're a little closed off to themselves. If you can't be with this piece and recognize what it has to say about being alive, there's a part of you that's a little dead. I hate to say it. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but I don't care if it's not perfect. I don't want perfection. I want something rich and meaningful and alive and raw.
Our wedding song was, we did it to I'll Cover You.
That's a great, beautiful song. It's a beautiful song.
We have time for one last question. Anybody else? One more? No?
Suckers.
Okay, great. Good job.
Can you speak about your formal acting and vocal training? And
question.
did you mainly learn from experience in shows, or did you seek out coaches in actual classes?
It's a little bit of all of the above. I didn't go to a BFA program because partly because I was working since I was a little kid, but I had coaches and directors work with me on a one-on-one basis over the years from when I was a little kid through, my mid-20s in New York. So I'm all for training for sure. But I've also had I had kind of on-the-job coaching a lot of times too that was very helpful and very meaningful. When I was 14, I did that play that I've mentioned a couple times that, I'd been acting since I was a little kid, but that was the first time I really was with, I was with Ed Harris, who's like this incredible actor, and Judith Ivey, who's an amazing actress who should be way more famous than she is. And so being in the room with them, I was like, oh, this is what this is about, And then, had a great teacher that I worked with for a number of years in New York named Sandy Shurin, who's written a couple books, and I think she's quite brilliant. And, but it's, the musical director of Rent taught me so much about, just being with him and working with him taught me so much about vocal maintenance and doing an 8-show-a-week run of a show like that where I was singing like 35 songs a night and, stayed pretty healthy through it. And
Great, awesome. Thank you.
thank you, yeah.